So we're now joined by Los Angeles Times immigration reporter, Andrea Castillo, and education reporter, Paloma Esquivel. I'm going to start by reading a section of your reporting from October on ignored abuses among ICE detainees in privately run federal detention centers. A Times investigation found that since 2017, at least 265 calls made to police through 911 and non-emergency lines have reported violence and abuse inside California's 4 privately run federal detention centers overseen by ICE. Half the calls alleged sex crimes, including rape, sexual assault, and abuse against detainees. The rest were to report assault, battery, and other threats of violence against detainees and staff. In only 3 cases in which detainees said they were victimized, the records show a suspect was charged, the Times found. And in 2 of those, the suspects were deported before they could be arrested. So what first alerted you to the fact that migrant detainee cases of abuse were being ignored?
So we had read a lot of different stories about abuses in detention centers. That's something that there's quite a bit of reporting on generally. Sometimes, they're just specific cases. There were also a bunch of different reports by the Office of Inspector General and different reports that advocates have done over the years about issues, including like substandard healthcare, sexual assault, and other things like that. There was also some reporting directly before we started doing the project about complaints of assaults to ICE's internal helpline. But the news outlets that did that reporting, they had only gotten aggregate numbers through FOIA. And so we basically wanted to get around that and get a little deeper.
And is this a relatively recent issue, or is it specific to this administration?
I think that, well, the reporting that we were able to do, the numbers that we were able to do go back to the start of this administration, so 2017. But I think that the complaints, and I'm sure Andrea can speak more about this too, the complaints about abuses and the lack of accountability and the lack of investigations go back, long before the Trump administration.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, just to add to that, I was just going to say that private detention centers have been there since the beginning of immigration detention. So it's an issue that, if we're just talking about private detention centers in general, that's something that goes back quite far, about 40 years that, that detention centers have been in existence. And then, of course, the issues of abuses and other things like that in private detention centers go back quite a while, yeah.
Thank you. And could one of you give listeners just kind of a basic summary of your findings in this investigation into these abuses and how they were ignored and what kind of cases were given attention and what kind of cases were kind of swept under the rug?
Yeah, so I think we found a few things. So the first one was just looking at the calls to police and how often those calls were being made with these types of allegations about some kind of violence or abuse. So that was the first finding that you read. There was, the 265 calls to police from these facilities about some type of violence or abuse, half of those related to sex crimes. And then we tried to dig a little deeper and see what exactly is going on when these calls are made, what type of follow-up is done. And so, and we were able to look at some investigations in close detail and cases in which, for example, police would follow up, go to a detention center, try to investigate, and then be told, you don't need to, you don't need to do anything more here. We're done, we got it from here. And essentially be encouraged to sort of close a case without any follow-up. So that was one thing. And then we also looked at, sorry, I'm blanking out here. Andrea, do you want to fill in on the other two?
Well, we looked at memoranda of understanding. So there were agreements between the facilities and ICE and the companies that sort of spelled out in some cases what crimes they would respond to. And so inevitably that left some crimes out that they would not respond to.
Thank you. And your story dealt with many difficult to reach parties, including ICE agents and authorities, local police, and detainees. Can you walk us through how you found sources and actually got them to speak to you, and what difficulties you ran into? Or successes. I mean, obviously there were successes.
Well, so we kind of split it up a little bit. I tended to go the route of talking to different advocates and lawyers and just trying to find examples that we could use. And so I probably sent close to 100 emails to different lawyers throughout the course of like, what, a year and a half. And it was really hard. There were some cases in which, you know, lawyers would get on the phone with me and say, yeah, I have a client who fits this description, who suffered sexual abuse in a detention facility, but I know that she's not willing to, or he's not willing to talk to reporters. So there were a lot of cases in which, you know, somebody who it would have been a perfect example, just the trauma that they were left with made it such that they didn't want to discuss. And that is something that is completely understandable, and that, you know, I knew that we had to be prepared for and find a way to work around. So yeah, in the end, you know, we ended up talking to a handful, or maybe a little more than a handful of people, some who we didn't end up including in the story, but it was, I mean, I guess I feel grateful that anyone talked to us at all.
Yeah, I think that that was like one of the major challenges for this story is we had these numbers showing, you know, the number of phone calls, we had these MOUs, we had these, we had a few police reports sort of detailing things, but we didn't have people that were really sort of exemplifying these things that were happening. So yeah, so Andrea's like incredible diligence in reaching out to so many people to get the voices that we have in the story were so important, because without that, you know, it's just, you can't really see the impact, and the stories that they told us of the pain that they still live with is just, it's really memorable and really sort of demonstrates why these things matter.
And one other thing I'll say is just to give the example of the guy in the lead, Jay Lee. When I first started talking to him, he was so afraid of retaliation that, you know, I wasn't able to talk to him directly. We spoke through a lawyer, basically a lawyer talked to him on my behalf, asked him about his story. She had already been speaking to him. But so essentially, once he got a little bit more comfortable, he was then more willing to talk to me directly, because of course, ICE has confidential lines for, you know, that lawyers use to talk to clients. But then the lines that I use as a member of the media, member of the public, those lines can be monitored. So that was his hesitation. And so it just kind of, it took a long time to build trust with him. And then of course he still knew there was a risk talking to me over the lines that were recorded or monitored. And then eventually, you know, the nice thing is that he ended up being released about a couple weeks before we published the story. So that was just a big relief to me, knowing that, you know, he would feel safer and more secure in terms of retaliation.
Thank you. And what kind of government cooperation or interference did you encounter?
Yeah, that was definitely another challenge. We have, like, I think any immigration reporter knows that the federal government, right, ICE in particular and DHS, are not very talkative and are not very willing to engage. You know, we worked really hard and we asked them multiple times to be able to talk to somebody who would help us understand from the perspective of ICE and from the perspective of the federal government what was going on, and they declined to do that. And so they, you know, they provided us some answers, some written answers, which were helpful, but really it just isn't enough to help, you know, to help us understand what exactly is going on. So that was a real challenge. The local police and DAs were more cooperative. I think maybe, talk to us more, but still, I think there was a reluctance. It took a lot of going back over and over and over again and asking the same questions over and over again and asking to talk to actual people instead of sort of get written responses to make any progress there. And still, I think in some cases they declined to talk to us. So it was sort of mixed. But it did help to keep going back and asking over and over again.
And that is part of the reason why we wanted to frame the story through the lens of local law enforcement to begin with, was knowing that it's so difficult to get a lot of information from ICE, both in terms of getting somebody to talk to over the phone, and then also in terms of getting records. We wanted to be able to find some way to still look into these detention facilities while not having to rely on that.
Yeah. And from reading the story, I saw that there was a lot of like passing the buck between these different entities. So how did you deal with that, with finding out like what is the actual policy at these facilities?
Yeah, I feel, I don't know if we dealt with it completely because it's still, I feel like there's still questions there. Yeah. That was really, I think Andrea and I asked ourselves over and over again, okay, so who is responsible and how do we get the clearest answer? And I think that at the end, the sort of conclusion we came to is like, there isn't clear lines about who is responsible and who's taking responsibility. And so we just tried to reflect that in the story of that, so we think they're doing it. No, they're doing it. No, they're supposed to do it. We sort of just, in the end, just had to kind of reflect that in the story.
Right.
And reflecting that uncertainty, it kind of emphasizes how dire the situation is for people stuck in these detention centers. So kudos.
Thanks.
And can you describe what kind of data sets you used and how you access them?
Yeah, so the easiest thing, the first thing was to get the call logs of, phone calls that have been made about incidents at these locations. That was pretty straightforward request. I think every agency complied with that pretty quickly. It was a matter of sort of, some of these were given to us in like PDFs and we had to make them into databases. So that was a little frustrating and took some time. But that was the first thing. And then we went and asked for police reports. Only one agency, the Bakersfield Police Department, gave us those. Every other law enforcement agency declined to do that. So we went and asked for essentially the details of what's in the police reports. So the factual circumstances of each instance. And for the most part, the agencies gave us that, which was helpful, but not as helpful as a police report that sort of outlines in a narrative way what exactly happened and what the police response was and what the outcome was. And then after that, we had to try to figure out how many of these cases, a really important thing that we wanted to do with the story was figure out how many of these incidents were prosecuted, right? Mm-hmm. So we had to go to the prosecutors and ask, how many of these cases were prosecuted. And that was a little bit challenging because they told us, well, we can't look it up by the address or the facility. So you have to give us case numbers so that we can look it up that way. So we were able to do that ultimately because we had enough information from law enforcement. But every step of the way, I was sort of trying to figure out ways around the roadblocks that were put in front of us in terms of like, no, you can't have this information. So we would sort of say, okay, well, if we can't have that, then can we have this? And will that lead us to where we want to get? And then once we had all that information, we started asking questions from law enforcement and from the district attorney's office about sort of how they were responding to these incidents. And they started mentioning these MOUs that they had with the facilities that were sort of outlining the way that they were responding. And so that I think was the final records request was asking for those MOUs so that we could understand what was written down in terms of what they could and could not do. I think, right, Andrea, am I missing anything here?
No, that was very thorough.
And how comfortable were the two of you with data reporting before this? Paloma, I know you're a 2018 data fellow, so if you could speak to what you learned at the fellowship that maybe influenced your approach to the story, but also Andrea, if you could talk about how comfortable you were with data reporting before this as well.
Yeah, not at all comfortable. I'm
I see
still
the
not
laughter.
comfortable. I still feel like I'm definitely learning. Yeah, I don't think I had done any real data reporting. I had done data reporting, but partnered with a data reporter. So that's one thing, right? But to sort of try to do it on our own was a whole new thing. It was really challenging. I do feel like I learned a lot during the fellowship, just in terms of like basic spreadsheet 101 and things that I could do and things that I could not do. I did get some help from my mentor who was assigned to me through that fellowship when it came time to taking some of the call logs that we got, particularly from the San Diego Sheriff's Department, that were sort of all in, they were all, rather than give a narrative description of what the incident was about, there were these codes. And so we had to line up those codes with the actual description. And I had no idea how to do that. So I was able to get help from my mentor to do that. And that was really helpful.
I had not done any data reporting other than a bit of basic math here and there in my stories. Yeah, I mean, I've taken a course at IRE on basic Excel knowledge. I think, you know, in those kinds of situations, unless you have a practical story to apply it to, for me at least, it's like in one ear out the other. So this story definitely helped get me comfortable with spreadsheets and with using numbers. I think I still need to take another refresher course on Excel and, you know, on all of the like functions and stuff. But I at least feel like now not only do I see like I always, I guess, saw the value of data reporting, but I feel like it's not something that's sort of impossible for me.
Thank you. And what tips do you two have for other journalists hoping to report on private detention centers?
I think that, I guess my favorite thing about this story is that, you know, the huge challenge with reporting on detention centers is getting any information from the federal government. It's, you know, if you put in a FOIA request, it could take years to get back any information, and you will likely have to sue, and not a lot of people can do that. So I think that the thing that I really appreciated about this story was sort of trying to find a workaround for that, you know, and for us, that was the local records, and going to the local police departments. So I would say, you know, if you're blocked at the federal level, there's still that option of going local, and try to do that and see what you can find. That would be my one big takeaway, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the same takeaway that I have. I mean, I'll just say I got a records request back that I made, a FOIA request back from ICE that I made last year for this story. Just got it back. So wow. It can take a while. And at this point, you know, the story's done. So really figuring out that there was a way around that there was a way to still get localized data. And this is a story that people could repeat in their own communities. Any community where there is a detention facility, they could repeat this story. In fact, I've seen a sort of similar story done, I think it was in Denver, But yeah, so it's not impossible, and also there is good, investigative reporting to be done on immigration at a localized level.
Okay, thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.